you've ever driven the back road west of Lincoln, Garden Bar, McCourtney, all those twisty little strips of asphalt where your GPS loses hope, you've probably looked around at those warm golden hills and thought, dang, this place feels like Mother Nature left it in the toaster a smidge too long. Warm sunshine, warm dirt, warm breeze that whispers, stay a while, the hills aren't done with you yet. It's cozy, it's peaceful, and it's the kind of place where your coffee stays warm just because the air refuses to let it cool off. But once upon a time, and truly not that far back, the good folks of a tiny little spot called the Thermalands saw something so shocking, so outrageous, and so aggressively un-Thermalands that one stubborn fella said he wouldn't believe it unless hell froze over. And wouldn't you know, hell packed its bags, put on a parka, and froze. This is the tale of how land selling scheme, a Great Depression gamble, and one offensively cold morning teamed up to give Western Placer County one of the strangest moments in its long, dusty history. It's part truth, part folklore, and part you can't make this stuff up, but apparently somebody did. Before anyone dreamed up the name Thermalands, this whole area, McCourtney, South Four Oaks, Garden Bar, Cuyahoga Springs, was just known as Valley View. And look, nobody claimed it had a great view. Old timers joke that the view was mostly dust and rocks and whatever cow happened to wander past your window like it was the world's slowest parade float. But the land did have one special trick up its sleeve: warmth. And the foothill thermal belt made warm air pool there like a soup bowl. It's the meteorological equivalent of having heated seats in your pickup truck before heated seats were ever invented. Perfect for citrus. So in the late 1800s, ranchers, including the ever-ambitious J. Parker Whitney, started planting oranges and lemons out here like they were daring the universe to stop them. And guess what? The universe said, sure, go ahead. The trees grew like weeds. Delicious, brag-worthy, money-making weeds. Newspapers started calling the area the Placer County Citrus Belt. Southern California heard that and got real offended really fast. Los Angeles folk were like, excuse me, you can't just out-citrus us, that's our entire personality. So in 1887, local growers hauled crates of Placer County oranges down to LA just to rub it in and announced, ours ripened earlier. LA did not clap for us. So jump ahead to 1930, and here comes a Los Angeles company called Snow Pomeroy and Company, marching into Placer County with the swagger of men who never once doubted themselves. These guys showed up with brochures hotter than the land they were trying to sell. They declared, "This is the place! Nature has perfected this land! Fortunes will be made! Buy now or cry later!" They basically yelled everything in capital letters. And, and they said it all while standing in the area that most maps hadn't bothered to acknowledge yet. They named it the Thermalands because it's, if your entire sales pitch is warmth, you might as well lean all the way in. They built a big old sales office off South Forbes Road, drew a bunch of parcel lines that, that were basically like slicing it up like a pie, and started selling 8 to 25 acre lots as fast as they could talk. People bought them like they were running from the Dust Bowl, because some of them were. So this is when our story introduces the heroes, the skeptics, and a guy everyone talks about, even though no one remembers his actual name. Our first character is the Southern Settler. This man had moved so many times he practically had a punch card. He built himself a shack with more holes than the wood, and announced, "I ain't moving until hell freezes over." You'd probably regret that statement. So our second character is the Garden Bar Rancher. This guy had been out there since before dirt was cool. He claimed parts of Garden Bar, road never froze, not once. The land out there, got a warm breath, he said. You can feel it if you sleep right on the ground. And weirdly, ranchers did find warm patches where the soil stayed toasty. Cows loved it. Chickens loved it. People argued about it at potlucks. Was it geology? Nope. Maybe. Magic? Barnyard superstition? Yeah, actually, all of the above. Our third guy is the salesman. Imagine the slick hair, shiny shoes, and a cologne cloud so thick it created its own microclimate. He called the Thermalands the next Riverside. Locals called him that fellow with a tone that explained everything. And last but certainly not least, Valley View school teacher, Miss Carmichael. Patient, tough. She taught spelling, math, manners, and how to shoe a goat out of the classroom. She'd seen everything except for what was about to happen next. Now, if you really want to understand Thermalands and Valley View before it, you don't start with the brochures. You start with the schoolhouse, because out here, long before anyone argued about citrus, warmth, or whether optimism could survive a hard freeze, the schoolhouse was the community. The Fruitvale Schoolhouse, much like Valley View itself, wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. One room, wood floors, worn smooth by decades of boots, tall windows that let in just enough light and just enough cold to keep everyone honest. And if you ask folks who grew up hearing the stories about this place, two names come up more than any other, and that's Willie and Butch. Not because they were famous, not because they were important, but because they were everywhere. Willie and Butch were schoolhouse kids, the kind of boys who arrived early because their families lived far out, the kind who stayed out late because there wasn't much reason to rush home. They sat in the same room as everyone else, first graders beside near-grown teenagers who already knew how to plow fields and fix fences. They learned arithmetic, spelling, and penmanship, but they also learned which desk, creaked the loudest, which floorboard squeaked like it was tattling, and how far you could lean back in a chair before gravity filed a complaint. So the teacher taught reading and sums, and they also taught patience and cooperation. And at least once they taught Willie and Butch that, no, you cannot bring a goat into the schoolhouse, even if it followed you. Because Fruitvale wasn't just a place for lessons, right? It was where town meetings happened, arguments got settled, soup got shared, and news traveled faster than any newspaper ever could. If something big happened out in the foothills, a freeze, a flood, newcomers arriving with suspicious optimism, odds are the schoolhouse heard about it first. And Willie and Butch heard about it twice, once from the adults and once again on the playground, slightly exaggerated. And then came the winter of 1932. When the freeze hit the Thermalands, the schoolhouse stove became the most important piece of technology in western Placer County. Wood was hauled in before sunrise. Older kids took turns feeding the fire. Willie and Butch learned very quickly that stove duty was serious business. You didn't let it go out, you didn't wander off, and you definitely didn't dare each other to touch it, because once was enough to teach that lesson. Kids arrived wearing everything they owned, coats over sweaters, sweaters over shirts, sometimes feed sacks stitched in makeshift insulation. And no one laughed because everyone looked the same. Teachers cooked soup right there in the classroom, beans, broth, whatever someone could spare. Willie and Butch learned the lesson, unspoken rule pretty fast. You ate what was offered, you didn't ask where it came from, and you didn't ask who brought it. Because the deal was simple. You help now, you survive later, and you argue about orange problems later. Before radio reached every home, the schoolhouse was the rumor mill. And during the freeze of 32, the rumors were spectacular. Kids whispered things they'd hear at home. My dad said the ground froze clear through. My uncle said warm spots finally gave up. Someone says the salesman skipped town. Willie swore he heard the earth crack, at night. So Butch claimed his boots stuck to the porch boards. Teachers pretended not to hear, while they absolutely hear everything just like today. At Fruitvale, just like most one-room schools dotting the foothills, the same sentence kept floating around. It's colder than it's ever been, which in a place called the Thermalands felt pretty personal. Some families left after the freeze, but the ones who stayed, they stayed because places like Fruitvale were still standing. Because if the school was still open, if the stove was still warm, if Willie and Butch were still arguing quietly in the back row, then the community wasn't done yet. Out here, schoolhouses weren't just about education. They were proof of intent, proof that people planned to be here next year, and the year after, and the year after that. Long enough to rebuild, long enough to argue about the names like Valley View versus Thermalands, long enough to tell the same stories again. The Fruitville Schoolhouse you'll be visiting now, it remembers all of this, right? It remembers the winters that the wind cut, through walls. It remembers the boots stomping mud off before class. It remembers boys like Willie and Butch, not because they were special, but because they were typical. Kids who grew up, kids who left, kids who stayed, kids who told the story later like they were, like they were there because they were. And when people talk about Thermalands today, about warmth and resilience and folklore, they're really talking about places like this, because the land might freeze. But the community never did. So autumn of 32 was so dry the dust was begging for moisturizer. Then December arrived, bringing in a cold rain that made every joint in your body file a complaint. Then came the morning, December 10th. A local looked at his thermometer, squinted, and tapped it again. 17 degrees in Thermalands? 17? People ran outside like, wait, this is a prank, right? Did the salesman do this? For days, it never warmed up. Citrus trees blackened like burnt marshmallows. Garden bar ranchers stared at their warm spots and said, well, butter my biscuits, it froze. The LA salesman tried to spin it, right? He said, this is a temporary meteorological inversion. Folks weren't sure if that was what he was describing, weather or casting a spell. Then there was our stubborn settler, right? He stepped out into his icy porch, took one look around and grumbled, well, I'll be damned. And somewhere out there, hell cracked like a frozen lake. The freeze wasn't messing around. It stomped through the foothills like a toddler having a meltdown in a grocery store. For families who'd gambled everything on citrus, this was, supposed to be a fresh start, not a deep freeze disaster. Some packed up and left so fast the frost didn't leave time to catch them. Others stayed and replanted everything that they could coax out of the ground. Tomatoes, chickens, hope, whatever. Old-timers shrugged, I've seen worse, and kept going. Our garden bar rancher, he never stopped spreading the lore. The land got surprised, he'd say, happens to the best of us. Meanwhile, Valley View School kept right on teaching kids, bundled up like, human lasagna, layers on layers on layers. So the teachers cooked soup, neighbors delivered firewood, and somehow the little community out there just kept holding on. Because that's just what they do. So people still talk about that freeze like it was the day the earth briefly forgot who it was. Some say it ended the dream of northern citrus. Some say it taught the salesman a good hard lesson. Some say the thermal belt just had a bad day and needed a nap. So, but, even after all that frostbite and heartbreak, people still bragged. Our land doesn't freeze like the rest of Placer. And they said it with a straight face, too. And honestly, they're not wrong. The thermal belt is real. The folklore is real-ish. And the magic, well, that depends on how much you enjoy a good story. So let's do a reality check. True, the thermal belt is a real wacky microclimate. Joel Parker Whitney really did grow award-winning citrus here. Snow Pomeroy Code really, tried selling Thermalands like beachfront property. In 1932, freeze was brutal and absolutely happened. In 1932, freeze happened while the Great Depression was wreaking havoc. Some settlers bailed, some stayed and replanted. Valley View School was the heart of everything for generations. Valley View School opened in 1888 along with 13 other single-room school buildings. Valley View School was closed in 1946 because buses entered the picture and, there were a lack of school teachers after World War II due to the suffrage movement when that took hold. Valley View School was saved, and in 2020 it was converted to a museum and is the very last historical school building standing to this day. It's pretty amazing that we still have that. So what's probably true, right? Warm soil patches existed. Cows absolutely hogged them, chickens absolutely slept on them, and ranchers absolutely bragged about them. So what's local lore? The land that breathed warm. Frost stopped at McCourtney Road like it hit an invisible force field. Hell froze the same morning. Thermalands hit 17 degrees. Do we believe it? Well, that's between you and the warm dirt. So Thermalands today, it isn't just a citrus empire, a salesman's fever dream or a dot on an old map labeled Valley View. It's a community that stuck out, a patch of land built by people who replanted, rebuilt, shared soup, and swapped stories about the year the foothills decided to impersonate Antarctica. It's proof that history isn't always dramatic or tragic. Sometimes it's just folks trying their best to grow something. Trees, families, friendships, while the weather plays roulette. And maybe if you wander out towards Garden Bar on a chilly morning, you'll find a patch of warm ground waiting for you. So before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to the Lincoln Area Archives Museum. These incredible folks keep our town's history alive. Every map, every newspaper, every folder packed with stories just like this one. If you never read in, you're missing out. So thanks for watching another Strange Stories of Lincoln. Keep your eye out for the next episode. If you like this one, share it on YouTube with someone who cares about our town or simply likes storytelling. As always, I'm Mike Crossfield, local business owner trying to build a better Lincoln together. Good night.